Good afternoon. Oh, come on, a little stronger than that. Good afternoon. There we go. I am Richard Crispin, and I am the president of Shared Expertise, and I am the chairman of the Commit Forum. And it is my privilege to welcome you to this magnificent space, to this second annual Commit Forum. We have selected such a grand and magnificent venue that we can fill it up with your grand and magnificent ideas, your grand and magnificent commitments. You know, the other day I was at home, and my 7-year-old son came up to me and he said, "Daddy, who are you going to vote for again?" And I said, well, you mean Mitt Romney? And he goes, "Yeah, don't do that." I said, well, why shouldn't I vote for Mitt Romney? He says, well, he's going to make the jobs, but he's going to cut down all the trees. So I said, oh, okay. Well, he's going to cut down all the trees. Well, that's not very good. Well, should I vote for the president? Barack Obama? No, you shouldn't vote for him either. I said, well, why not? He goes, well, he's a pretty cool guy. He makes lots of mistakes. And, I thought about it, and I said to myself, here is a 7-year-old boy, and he has perfectly captured both sides of the debate. What we are told is that we have to choose between picking business on the one hand, and if we do, well, then we're just a bunch of money-grubbing capitalists who don't care about the environment, we don't care about society. Or if we want to talk about corporate responsibility and the environment and building a more just society, well, we're just a bunch of tree-hugging hippies, and we don't know what it means to really run a business. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of those false choices. On behalf of my son, on behalf of all my children, and on behalf of all children everywhere, I reject those false choices. Because that's what they are. They are false choices. I no more believe that a business can treat the environment or society as an afterthought than I believe that the environment and society can treat business like an externality, like some kind of foreign invader or alien presence. They are, in fact, part of a holistic whole. One system. They need to be managed that way, they need to be operated that way, they need to be governed that way, they need to be treated that way. And that, for us, is the very essence of corporate responsibility. It is maximizing the positive impact of business while minimizing or eliminating the negative. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we've invited you all here to this Commit Forum, and why we're hosting, for the first time, an unconvention. We call it the Commit Forum because it culminates our Commit campaign, calling on companies to make commitments that will change the world. And we believe that for those commitments to have a chance, to have the best chance, well, we need a different kind of conversation. We need politics is unusual. And so we've invited to occupy this stage for the next day and a half leaders from all across the political spectrum. Leaders from businesses, from the academy, from NGOs, from nonprofits, from civil society, and from government, and we've asked them to model a particular behavior. What behavior, you ask? Well, I'll tell you. I'm Catholic, and this weekend marks the 50th anniversary to the day when Pope John the 23rd threw open the doors of the church and declared open the Second Vatican Council. And the council ushered in an entire wave of ecumenical dialogue between Catholics and other Christians, and interfaith dialogue between Catholics and completely different faiths, non-Christian faiths. And those dialogues were built on a very simple but important idea. And it's this, that we can disagree with everything that somebody else might have to say, but, well, they just might have a point. The other guy just might have a point worth listening to. And that is the very premise that we've asked every one of our speakers to take on, to start from the assumption that we might have common ground. And that from that common ground, no matter how small, that from that common ground we can build a real chance for cooperation, for real solutions to some of our toughest challenges. And we hope that on this stage we are going to light a spark. We've asked them to come here, start from that presumption of common ground, and light a spark. And a spark that we want to infect this entire hall, that we want to become so infectious that it invests all of you with a fire and a passion to go out into our society and to spread that idea of common ground. That the other guy just might have a point. Because what we know is that change doesn't begin in the ballot box, it doesn't begin in the legislature, and it doesn't begin in a court. Change begins in conversation. And transformative change begins in conversation with the other, those that we fundamentally disagree with. And it is only when we sit down with the other that we can really think about changing the way we do things. That is the challenge that we've issued to these speakers and these leaders who are going to be up here, and it is now the challenge that I issue to you. And I hope it is the challenge that you are ready to take on, because I can't go home on Thursday and look my son in the eye and tell him that he has to live with these false choices any longer. I hope that you will take on this challenge, that you will know that we're smarter than that, we're better than that. And in fact, now is our time to lead. Now is our time to commit. Thank you. Now, before I bring up our first speaker, there's a couple things that I want to point out to you on our program. First of all, we've got some wonderful people here in this audience. And in fact, the audience just keeps getting better and better year over year. There are over 625 of you registered for the forum over the next couple of days. You can see the breakdown here by type. We're particularly excited by the big showing from the press this year. Great opportunity for corporations and NGOs all to be here together with governments. We're also particularly impressed with the level of people here. As you can see, over a third of the audience is at the VP level or higher, and almost a fifth are in the C-suite with a C-level title, CEO, CFO, COO. And of course, everyone else here is welcome, and we are so excited to have such a wonderful gathering of people who can, in fact, take on this leadership challenge. We've also been privileged, as I said, because this is our Commit campaign. We've been privileged to have an amazing group of commitments be made over just the last few months since we left the Commit Forum last year. And I'm not going to talk about every one of them, but I do want to highlight a couple. First, AT&T. AT&T committed to reducing energy consumption by 17%, expanding alternative energy use by 5 megawatts, putting sustainability goals into their performance reviews, and reducing energy consumption by $40 million annually. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big hand to AT&T. I also want to highlight our friends, our Active Windows. No, I want to highlight our friends from the Schonstedt Instrument Company. They have committed to donating their mine detection equipment to demining teams in countries that can't afford them. Let's give a big hand to Schonstedt for their commitment to demining. Our good friends from Western Union and its Small Business for Better initiative committed to creating 10,000 new jobs over the next 3 years. Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for Western Union. There are also some commitments that you can join and that I want to particularly make sure that you all know are here and available for you to participate in. There's a bunch of these that you can read about on our website, but because several of these folks are here, I want to make sure that you know about the commitment that CDC Development Solutions has brought together, through which you can live out your commitment to both corporate responsibility and employee engagement through programs like their International Volunteer Corps. The Environmental Defense Fund allows you to host a Climate Corps Fellow in your company to transform the way your business thinks about energy and the environment. And by signing on to the UN Global Compact and the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, you will join the world's largest sustainability initiative and align your business with 10 universal principles of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. I'm also particularly excited about a relatively new commitment that's been made by Mosaic. The Mosaic Company and the Mosaic Company Foundation have made a commitment to the Nature Conservancy on a global partnership in 3 key impact areas: watershed restoration in Charlotte Harbor, nutrient stewardship in the 3 Midwestern watersheds of Minnesota's Root River, Iowa's Boone River, and Illinois' Mackinac River, tributaries of the Mississippi River that are focus of the Conservancy's Great River Partnership, and a practical demonstration project on the Conservancy's Sustainable Agricultural Intensification Strategy. We also have a very late-breaking sustainability commitment that actually just came through at 10:24 p.m. last night, and I received this slide at 10:25. from our friends at Walmart and PricewaterhouseCoopers, who have signed on to be champions of the sustainable supply chain community of practice. We were very honored to have the opportunity to launch this sustainable supply chain community of practice in partnership with the General Services Administration and the White House Council on Environmental Quality. And this community of practice allows companies and the government to share data on how they manage their supply chains, what practices they're using, what supply chain data they have, and to support and help build capacity throughout our environment. And I particularly want to recognize Nick Schufro. Is Nick here? There's Nick in the back there from PwC. Nick is here to represent their commitment. Give a big hand to their friends at PwC and Walmart. Now, of course, none of this would be possible without the incredible commitment that our sponsors have made. You see, we here in this room represent a movement. We represent the corporate responsibility movement, and it is only through the generosity of our sponsors like AT&T, Deloitte, Mosaic, and State Street that we were able to underwrite this wonderful location and this amazing gathering. And I really want to recognize and thank them, not just for their money, which of course we love, but for their commitments, their thought leadership, and their skill that they've brought to not just transforming their own businesses, but helping to create capacity for the rest of us to transform ours. Ladies and gentlemen, big hand for our sponsors. We're also very privileged to have our other sponsors, Adecco, AHA, Allegis, Brown Flynn, Corporate Voices, Green Mountain Coffee, Green Apple, Greif, Guidon Group, Henry Schein, MGM Resorts, Staff Management, UPS, and Western Union. Big hand for all of our forum sponsors, please. Now, the last thing I want to point out is a couple things on your program. As I said, we've been working really hard on this unconvention. And the unconvention was largely the brainchild of our friends at Future 500, and in particular, Nick Sorrentino and Bill Shireman. Nick and Bill, are you here? Can you stand up if you are? Where are Nick and Bill? Oh, maybe there they are. There's Bill Shireman, there's Nick. Thank you, guys. Nick and Bill have done an amazing job, together with the whole team there at Future 500, in bringing together some amazing people that are going to be on this stage. And, you know, one of the things that I think they can both attest to is the fact that every speaker that we talked to about having this unconvention said to us, wow, common ground, starting from the assumption of common ground on my issue, that's unique. I've never done that before, which made me wonder, like, what are all those other conversations they've been having about other than common ground? But we're so privileged to have so many great leaders, and it's in particular testament to Future 500 that they've been able to do that. And we've really tried to build this idea of common ground into the entire program, even into our debates. And we're going to host 2 debates over the next couple days. One tomorrow on mandated corporate disclosure, featuring the great Senator Paul Sarbanes, and another debate on the role of corporations in campaign finance reform. And the principal architects of both of those debates was our friend Dirk Olin, the editor-in-chief of Corporate Responsibility Magazine. Dirk, are you in the room? Dirk may be in the back bringing some speakers out. But I particularly want to recognize Dirk for his contributions in putting together what are going to be somewhat contentious debates, but in ensuring that what will come out of it is a learning about common ground that you can take forward. We've also got our Workforce Congress, largely the work of Elliot Clark, this gentleman over here. Elliot, wave your hand. Elliot is the CEO of Shared Expertise, and he's helped to put together a Workforce Congress that is going to bring together a different way of thinking about how you engage your employees and how you attract and retain the top talent that you have using sustainability and corporate responsibility. Big hand for Elliot and for Dirk. I also want to point out a couple of other partners. The Corporate Responsibility Officers Association, I have the privilege of serving as its executive director, and it is the professional society for anyone who is working to improve corporate citizenship of companies that they work for, invest in, or live next to. The advisory board met this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're on the advisory board of the CROA, could you stand up so that we can recognize you? Stand up. There we go. Give them a big hand. Thank you. And I also want to recognize Kim Gilliam. Kim, are you in the hall? Where's Kim? Kim? Okay, she's in the back. If you'd like to join the CROA, Kim Gilliam is your person. We're also privileged to be continuing our partnership with 2 wonderful institutions, the New York Stock Exchange. We sat down with the NYSE a couple of years ago, and we realized that over 80% of the companies on CR Magazine's 100 Best Corporate Citizens list are NYSE-traded companies. And from that realization, we've grown into a holistic partnership that has allowed us to continue to bring our information and data to their listed companies, and for them to host key conversations, including our executive summit tomorrow afternoon with several key dialogues there. And we really appreciate and thank the NYSE for that. And I also want to make sure that we recognize our very important foundational commitment partner, the Global Reporting Initiative. GRI, and we're privileged to hear from Aaron Slingtergen in a few minutes, has been really the foundation from which we've built so much of the work that we've done in corporate responsibility in improving corporate transparency, disclosure, and reporting. Big hand for NYSE and GRI, please. And with that, I just want to point out, if you are going to tweet about what's going on here, please use our hashtag, #CommitForum. If you don't know how to get onto the wireless, it is CommitForum is the SSID, and your password is commit2012, all lowercase. Please tweet away. And now, I just want to again thank you all for being here, welcome you to the forum, and challenge you to take up this leadership initiative, this leadership opportunity, so that we can really go forward in a new way based on common ground. With that, I want to bring up my good friend Dirk Olin. Dirk, as I mentioned, is the editor-in-chief of Corporate Responsibility Magazine, and Dirk is going to introduce our first speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, help me to welcome Dirk Olin.
Good afternoon, welcome. I've known our first speaker, Philip Howard, for almost 10 years, soon after he founded Common Good, a nonpartisan nonprofit legal reform group. And I will confess that when we first met, I suspected, and I'm not speaking out of school here, Philip knows this, that I suspected that he was a run-of-the-mill lawsuit basher. Then when I met him a second time for lunch, and this one you might not remember, Philip, uptown somewhere, the actress Susan Sarandon was sitting at the next table, and to be honest with you, I don't remember a single thing Philip said. But then I started reading his books, and I actually reviewed his third book, which was called Life Without Lawyers. And when Philip was on The Daily Show, Jon Stewart, of course, had a lot of fun with this title because Philip is a partner and I think vice chairman at Covington & Burling, one of the most famous law firms in the world. But here's the thing. Philip is not carrying water for the law or for lawyers or for business or against lawyers. He's not carrying water for one political party or the other. In fact, on the board of Common Good, for every Alan Simpson, there's a Bill Bradley. He's exquisite at balancing the current conservative and liberal debate, and not with the cable screamers that we've all come accustomed to, but in fact with people who are occupying or trying to rebuild a vital center. So the legal debate is polarized like our politics. The tort reformers are reductionists and the trial lawyers are protectionists. Returning us to that balance between the individual and society is what Philip is really about. And he's arguing for something you might call rugged communitarianism, which is really what corporate responsibility and the corporate responsibility movement is all about. After Philip shares his thoughts, he will be joined on stage by Nightline anchor Terry Moran, and I hope we'll also be joined by some of your questions. But for now, please join me in welcoming Philip K. Howard.
Thank you, Dirk, and thank you all for coming here. I am going to talk about responsibility, particularly the structure of responsibility, as the solution to many of the things that ail our society today. But just starting from where we are, it's hard to think of a time in our lives when society was confronting such important choices. We have to cut the deficit, and that requires completely remaking Medicare and Medicaid. Somehow we have to restore economic confidence in business and the future of our society so we can get more people to work again. We have to figure out how to make life sustainable on this planet. Last week we read about all the cod disappearing in the Atlantic, and this week yesterday I learned that they're all going to be 1/5 the size that they are. Well, if that's true, we have to figure out a way to solve that problem. We have to restore competence and rigor to our demoralized public schools. We have to rebuild a fraying infrastructure. There are all these things we have to do, all of which require us making new choices. But there's a problem, a hurdle that stands in the way of making these choices, and it's this. The defining feature of modern government, in my view, is the inability to make any important choices. This is not mainly a leadership problem, although we have a lot of leaders who seem to want to just kick the can down the road. This is a structural problem. Law has literally supplanted the ability to make choices. It's like sediment in the harbor. The laws have built up over the last 5 or 6 decades to the point where the people supposedly in charge cannot actually make the choices needed to fix any of the things I just mentioned. So a few examples. The budget. In 2010, 70% of total tax revenues were consumed by 3 entitlement programs that don't even come to Congress for annual authorization. 70% of all of our revenues Congress doesn't even vote on. It just happens automatically. And it's not just entitlement programs. When Andrew Cuomo became governor, New York State has a terrible budgetary crisis as well. He discovered that there was a juvenile detention facility upstate that cost $50 million a year to run that had no juveniles in it. He said, great, close it down, we'll save $50 million. Then he was told the sad legal reality that there's a law on the books in New York that prohibits closing any facility with union employees without at least 1 year's advance notice. So the taxpayer, $50 million of taxpayer money was wasted to keep this unutilized facility open. Rebuilding infrastructure. Remember, President Obama, when he first took office, said there's no reason Europe or China should have the fastest trains. Well, yes, there is. Environmental review has evolved into a process of no pebble left unturned, so that at this point, it takes almost a decade for any significant project to go through the environmental review process. Last week, I spent half a day with the project manager for rebuilding the Bayonne Bridge. The Bayonne Bridge sits over a channel that goes to Newark Harbor. It needs to be either changed or raised to let the new generation of post-Panamax ships go under it into Newark Harbor. Very important for the economy, very important for the environment. These are much more environmentally friendly ships. The project manager figured out how to do it without building a new bridge or new tunnel, just by raising the roadway. So they would not change the foundations, they would not change the right-of-way for the bridge. Nothing important would change. That was in 2009. They're now being threatened with lawsuits, still haven't gotten their approvals for shoddy environmental review. Review of what? They're not changing anything. But no one has, not even the president, has the authority to say, just go and rebuild the bridge. This is an obviously good project for the public interest. It's not just big projects. Last year, a tree fell in a creek in Franklin Township, New Jersey. It's causing flooding. The town fathers were going to send in a backhoe and just pull the tree out. And then the lawyer told them that, well, this was a Class C1 creek, whatever that is. And a Class C1 creek, you have to go through a formal process to do anything. So 12 days and $25,000 later, they finally got permission to do what was obvious, was pull the tree out of the creek. If you want to start a business, Mayor Bloomberg found that if you wanted to start a new restaurant in New York, you had to get approvals from 9 different agencies. It is literally impossible to start a business in America today and comply with all the law. People just kind of do their best and hope they get away with it. And finally, and we could go on all day, we talk about children's play, everything. System of justice. Remember a few years ago when someone in Washington, which is the source of most things evil, sued his dry cleaners for $54 million because they lost a pair of pants? It's a really reasonable lawsuit. It went to court. The case went on for 2 years to a full trial. It was a bench trial till the obvious happened and the case was thrown out. And then the guy appealed for several more years. Well, why did that happen? It happened because the judge didn't think he had the authority to make a choice to do what was obvious, which is to say, 5 minutes into the case, maybe you have a claim in small claims court for your lost pair of pants for $100, but not in a court of general jurisdiction for millions of dollars, case dismissed without prejudice to refiling in small claims court. It's not that hard. It's not very controversial, but the judge didn't think he had that authority. And so you have this society where up and down, everyone with responsibility is sort of paralyzed with fear. Teachers won't put arms around crying children because they're scared they're going to get sued, that sort of thing, because we don't have judges who believe they have the authority to make the choices needed to keep lawsuits reasonable. So in all these cases, in all these situations and many more, sensible choices are preempted by law. And so we have a situation where more or less literally our democracy is run by dead people. It's run by the people who made the deals in 1965 for some program or another, and they just take a life of their own, and no one can do anything. It's run by the people who, and most of these laws are well-intentioned. You don't want to get rid of environmental review, but it shouldn't take 10 years. It just took a life of its own, and no one can do anything about it. I'm stating the obvious when I'm saying you cannot run a society this way. You have to actually put people in office who can make choices. And just to hammer the point home, there are 4 reasons, there are 4 really bad things about not making fresh choices. The first is that every law has unintended consequences. Every choice has unintended consequences, but every law especially does. Special ed laws were passed in 1975 to alleviate a shameful neglect of disabled children. Very important law. It has taken a life of its own so that now it consumes 21% of the total K-12 budget in America for a tiny fraction of the students who actually need it. Could we spend that money in a better way in schools? Yes. No one's even asking the question because it's a law. 40 years ago, somebody passed it, and it's like a ship steaming into the night. No one at the helm. The second problem is that all these old laws and programs don't reflect our current needs and priorities. I'm writing a book right now where I'm arguing that fixed entitlements are immoral. It is immoral to waste what's estimated to be $200 to $300 billion a year in a wasteful structure of Medicare, when all those dollars could be used for, you name it, cleaning up the environment, pre-K education, many other choices. Every public dollar involves a moral choice. The point of our democracy is to elect people to go into office to make those choices for us. They're not even coming up for vote. The third problem with this choiceless system of government we have is that it's not coherent. The countries with which we are competing in Europe and other developed countries have coherent codes. They actually have departments that try to make sure that legal codes make sense, that they fit together. Our laws are just piled up, so it resembles a junk pile. There are 82 separate federal programs for teacher training. Over 200 million words of binding federal law and regulation, most of which nobody's gone and reviewed in decades. And worst of all this law is built on a governing philosophy designed to prevent choices by people from government. Our idea of the rule of law is that regulation should tell everybody not only what to do, have a reasonably safe workplace, meet these standards for the environment, but tells us exactly how to do it. We have a legal system that's just like central planning, with the one exception that at least there, every 5 years, they came together to create a new central plan that didn't work. We're run by dead central planners. So it's all these people who made these choices over the decades that tell us how to do things even though they don't make any sense. So what's the solution to this? Well, the solution is to put people in charge again. I mean, it sounds sort of stupid and obvious, but that's the solution. At every level of responsibility, from teachers up to the White House, people have to be free to take responsibility, and there have to be mechanisms to hold them accountable if they don't fulfill their responsibilities. Now, this sounds really simple and it's too easy. It's incredibly revolutionary. It requires walking away from those 200 million words of federal law, not to deregulate. The role of government is more important in 2012 than it was 50 years ago, much more. We don't know who put the paint on our toys. We don't know if the factory next door is polluting. We don't know who's taking care of the fish in the seas. We need government oversight. Government needs to be a traffic cop in a crowded society, but it can't do it in this central planning, bureaucratic sort of way. It doesn't work. So the kinds of things are needed as you go from detailed regulations toward broad goals and principles. So I'll give one example. OSHA, the Worker Safety Agency, has 4,000 rules that tell people exactly what kind of equipment and tools and stuff to have in the workplace. One of the rules requires that stairwells be illuminated by artificial or natural light. Now, think about that. Do you really need a rule that says the stairwells need to be lit? If it's dark, you can just give somebody, that's dangerous, you can give somebody a citation. It's completely self-evident that you shouldn't have a dark stairway. Secondly, how else could you illuminate it other than by natural or artificial light? It's a completely stupid, it's like somebody went to had a weekend retreat and they got drunk and they tried to think of every possible rule that you could possibly have for any obvious thing. So you read these rules and that's more or less what they are. They're completely self-evident. Most of those 4,000 rules could be subsumed within one sentence. Tools and equipment shall be reasonably suited for the use intended in accord with industry standards. It's really not that hard. That means that the CEO, all of you in the room, I know you're all CEOs, the CEO can have a dime store hammer to tack the pictures up on the wall, and the guy who's building the house out in the field has to have an industrial grade hammer. People can use their judgment, but the current system doesn't allow that to happen. So what are examples of the kinds of radical changes that would take us to the shift? Well, one is I think we do need one constitutional change. And the constitutional change would be to sunset all regulatory programs with budgetary implications every 15 or 20 years. The point is not to get rid of good programs, but to force Congress to reconsider its priorities on important goals like special education and ask questions, is this really how we should be, we should be spending our money? Our founders made a mistake. They didn't realize it would be 100 times harder to repeal a law than it would be to pass it in the first place. Because as soon as a law is passed, these vested interests, armies of vested interests surround it. And if you want to change one word of that law, you have to get a majority of the members of Congress to run a gauntlet of special interests, hitting them over the head with money. That's why it's so unthinkable to get rid of these laws that nobody even proposes it. So we need a constitutional amendment for that. The second thing we need is we need recodification commissions in every single area of law. We need to get experts and leaders to go out and look versions of the Simpson-Bowles Commission, worker safety, FDA, you name it, in each area, give them a year or two, and have them come up with a series of recommendations not to gut the agency, to make it work more effectively and more simply. And in general, what we need to do is replace all of this bureaucratic jungle with authority. So in justice, for example, one area that my group Common Good has been active in is in healthcare justice. So we have a joint venture with the Harvard School of Public Health to look at designing a new system of justice that would actually align the incentives of doctors towards better and cost-effective care. And what we concluded is we needed an entirely new institution. We needed special health courts, no juries, be much quicker for somebody who's injured by a mistake, they get compensation. But if a doctor was unfairly charged with causing an injury that he didn't cause, this system would affirmatively support him and write written rulings about standards of care so doctors would know what's expected of them. It's a completely new institution. It's a brand new idea. Everyone has signed on to it. The largest consumer groups, the patient safety groups, the doctors, the insurers, everyone except the trial lawyers who hate it. President Obama put $50 million in his budget a couple of years ago for it. Mitt Romney had an op-ed in favor of it a few months ago in USA Today. So it's not partisan. One interest group, which feeds off of the unreliability of the system, which says you might be liable for $20 million for the baby born with cerebral palsy, even though you didn't do anything wrong. It's that phenomenon of the current system of justice that we have to get rid of, and that's where they make their money. And so they said, but it will happen. That's one example. Another example is we need a super authority to approve infrastructure. There should be a year of good faith environmental review, and then somebody ought to have authority to make a decision. We have to move forward. We could never build anything that our society is built on today. We could never build the interstate highway system. We could never build the power lines. We could never build anything because the environmental review makes it impossible. So we need a new authority. And finally, one of the things really important nobody ever talks about is we have to completely overhaul the civil service system. You can't give people the freedom to make judgments unless you can hold them accountable if they're mean-spirited or venal. So we have to restore accountability to the public service. So how could we possibly go about doing this? This seems like pie in the sky. Nothing today is politically feasible. Nothing. Congress can't even extend the debt ceiling. So you say, well, this is hopeless. I mean, changing the whole thing. Well, what the political scientists say is that the more paralysis there is, the closer we are to a situation where we're going to have big change. That the way societies change is not incrementally, it's not by trying to prune this horrible jungle, bureaucratic jungle that's grown up over the decades. It's like a stick-slip phenomenon of an earthquake. The pressures build and build, and all of a sudden, one day, for reasons that nobody can predict, like the person catches himself on fire in Tunisia, that sort of incident, all of a sudden, it slips. And there's this period of great either fear or anger. And not only the opportunity, but the imperative for change. And what's really scary about that is you don't know what kind of change you're going to get. I mean, that brought in Mussolini 70 years ago. So what we're doing in our board, which is, as Dirk said, consists of some of the most prominent citizens in America, what we're trying to do is create a new vision, not only of the villain that needs to get overthrown, but a vision of what the society should look like. The villain is a giant bureaucratic blob. It's everywhere. It's in every institution. It's in all of our lives. It's in the workplace. It's in the employee. It's that the rules in my law firm doesn't allow me to ask someone I'm interviewing, where are you from? Because I might say it in an offensive way, so it's on the list of where are you from? It's embodied in really everything in the society. And the vision is really simple. You go back to law as a framework, not law as central planning. You put people back in charge. The history of doing this, there is a history of societies remaking themselves and radically simplifying and recodifying their laws. The history is incredibly hopeful. It stimulates, it supercharges the economy. When the Emperor Justinian simplified the laws back in ancient times, commerce in the ancient empire took off. When Napoleon, his greatest accomplishment, created the Napoleonic Code in the first decade of the 19th century, all of a sudden the economies became much more solid and sound, and people had trust. In a smaller way, when in this country we created a uniform commercial code in the 1950s, We had then the best system of contract law in the world, and that was one of the reasons why, until today, we have one of the best economies in the world, because people trust dealing with each other in matters of contract. So the opportunities of this simplification for all of us are huge. 4 years ago, President Obama ran on the campaign slogan, "Yes, we can." That's not true. No, we can't. We can't because the system doesn't allow us to. That's why we have to change it. That's why we have to change that slogan to first let us be able to make choices, and then, yes, we can. But we're not going to do it until we remake the structure. The system is broken. There's no solution to it other than to remake it. Thank you. Gary?
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Philip. I have known the next person who's going to join us on stage for over 30 years, and despite that, he has agreed to come today. Terry Moran is the anchor of Nightline and was a writer before he was a talking head, so he knows whereof he speaks. Terry Moran.
It's great to be with you. I'm very excited about this. What a great afternoon I've got to go for. I was at the News Emmys last night. Nightline won 4, count of 4. And to go from that, which is the best of what television news can do, sometimes we don't do our best, as I'm sure everyone will agree, to a discussion like this, which is about ideas and the ideas that shape the world we cover. I'm pleased, really pleased to be here. And let me start with a big question, because you put out a big topic here. Is it too much entrenched law or too little strong politics? In other words, in our history, we've had moments where we've said, this won't work because the law is rigged against change, civil rights, for example, or the tax code in 1986, which was one of the first things I covered. And yet, a political movement can form, not in fear or anger, but with the right politics and the right leadership. Yes, we can.
Right. Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think having strong leadership would make this possible and would advance the cause. But I think it was Hayek who said that political leaders are lagging indicators. So politicians tend to do what the public demands that they do. If there's a crisis, the public demands change. By the way, whenever there's a crisis, everyone completely ignores the rules. You know, when Katrina happens, nobody goes through environmental reviews. They just go rebuild it. You know, it's not. It's so we honor it in the breach. But I fear that the politics will not lead us there unless we create a public demand.
And the public is beginning to demand this, isn't it?
Yes.
So what's the next step for an ordinary American voter who listens to you, gets it, and says, what can I do? Is there a Tea Party meeting I should go to? Is there a candidate I should back?
Well, you know, we're trying to figure this out. The Tea Party harnesses a very real anger at the kind of things I'm talking about. But their solution is to do away with government, which really is not the solution, as I indicated. Similarly, Occupy Wall Street, you know, that movement also channels a very real problem in our society, which is the lack of accountability in large institutions. But there, too, they don't really, their solution is more iron manacles, you know, so that nobody has the ability to make transparency. You know, we're trying to figure it out. I mean, how do you crowdsource it? We have a not-for-profit. You know, we have a lot of followers. We have a joint venture with the Atlantic Monthly. So every other day we have new essays by lots of important people on a particular topic. So we're trying to bang on pots and pans as much as we can, but we haven't figured out how to make it into a movement. But it has to be a movement.
And you've put your finger on on some deep structural problems, which is what you're talking about, reaching all the way into the Constitution. I'm very intrigued by the Sunset Amendment that you mentioned. But let me offer a different one. Maybe the amendment that's needed to spring the energy out of the public into the political system is a campaign finance amendment. One that would undo the Citizens United, that would establish that corporations are not people for the purpose of free speech and the giving of money. And that when members of Congress and senators stood up on the floor of their chambers to debate something, they weren't carrying, figuratively, bags of money on their backs.
Right. Well, I think campaign finance has been incredibly corrosive, so I'm all for you in changing that. But a lot of the problems we talked about, not being able to pull the tree out of the creek in Franklin Township, New Jersey, doesn't have anything to do with campaign finance. It's really just a stupid bureaucratic system. I mean, there are people in. I don't happen to live in Washington, so I plead innocent. But you live in Washington, so you're guilty. I mean, if I propose simplifying OSHA, in Washington, people would think I'm crazy. If I proposed it in Kansas or in Wisconsin, people would think I'm completely right. I mean, there's the government, not just the money part of government, but all of government. Civil servants have truly become a deviant subculture. Their values no longer reflect those of the society around them, which is one of the reasons we need to change civil service. Howard Baker's on our board, former Senator Howard Baker, and one of the proposals he made years ago is to have a proposal that would make Congress part-time so that people would have to spend more time at home. Because he thought that the values of Washington were so corrosive of common sense. And
there's a line that conservatives like to use, that the worst thing to ever happen to the American government was air conditioning. Because it kept them all in Washington through the long, hot months of...
Actually, I had an idea, which was we have another constitutional amendment to move the national capital. And the way this would work is, this is great. No, this is a good idea. You move the national capital, and no one would be able to move with it because they wouldn't be able to sell their homes. There's no market, right? So you move it to St. Louis or someplace, and then you have all these for sale signs all over Georgetown and Chevy Chase and McLean, and bread lines and stuff. And eventually, the government signs a contract with Disney to come in and run Washington as a theme park, hiring everyone to do just what they're doing today, which is pretending to do something.
That's good. I remember a very obscure presidential campaign. Phil Crane was a congressman from Illinois. He was actually my congressman. It's the only reason I know him. And he ran for president in 1980 to the right of Ronald Reagan. Wow. And one of his ideas was that you wouldn't move the entire government, but you'd move pieces of it. You'd put the Department of Agriculture in Des Moines or Omaha. You'd put the Department of Energy, if you were going to have one, in Houston or something like that. And you'd break that cultural strangle. Because you're talking about a cultural problem, not just a legal one, but a mentality.
Truly. I mean, you can't not go to these meetings and listen to the conversation in dialogue, in using initials that you don't understand and language that no one. The idea that they made Dodd-Frank very specific so it would be clearer, 1,000 pages, when it's completely incoherent. You can't follow. It's like the tax code. Well, that's all these people, they wear pointy hats. I mean, it's really, it's just not a healthy place.
I wonder, though, if this is partly the cost of occupational safety, the cost of child nutrition. In other words, I pay taxes, and I know that for every dollar of taxes I pay, X amount is going to go to the hungry kid, and X amount is going to go to the people with the pointy hats, and I'm okay with that.
Right. On balance, most of the areas of regulation were better off with the regulation than having, sort of the Wild West. I would agree with that. But we're at a point in our society where we can't afford that waste. And by the way, it's really not very effective. I mean, it's not worth going. But Australia years ago changed their nursing. They got rid of 1,000 regulations for nursing homes and replaced it with 31 principles. Been really well studied. It works much better. People actually try to be caring and loving instead of going around and doing checklists of whether the waste basket is empty in the bathroom or these trivial things that the rules require. So it's just a better, it's a better system. Whatever new system that allows people to take responsibility will be a better system. And we're not going to have a choice. It's not like I'm saying, please come with me. We're not going to have a choice. We're about to fall off a cliff.
How do you mean that?
We can't afford the society. We're going to have a crisis of debt. Either China's going to stop buying our debt or something else is going to happen. We're not in a sustainable situation. This is not, let's make it better. This is, we have to make these choices. We've got to protect the fish in the seas. We've got to do these things. Well, that requires completely changing the rules and how we make those choices. So, so we have to, we in this room, we and our friends, we have to figure out a way to come together and create a new vision, because history will tell us that when societies get in this position, bad things happen. And you don't have to go very far back in history to see the bad things. So I think America's rich enough and good enough that those bad things won't happen to America. I'm not preaching that. But we are going to have to make choices.
It's a sclerotic moment in American history. But we're good at tossing out the old and trying something new, usually, aren't we?
Well, I think we will once we get in the mood to do it. But we need the vocabulary for doing it. I mean, what's the campaign slogan? Kill the blob? I don't know what the campaign slogan is. We'll give a prize to $100 to any of you who, even better, give us $100. It's tax deductible. $100 if you can come up with the right slogan for us from which we can use to build a movement. Everyone's interested. I'm meeting with Ariana tomorrow to talk about how to build it. Jon Stewart's on board, very interested. It's not like people are resisting this. We just need to go from sclerosis to a kind of a cogent goal.
Well, increasingly, the way we do that, and we were talking about this back there, is really through this kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the problems is that we have a society where most of us, even down to the very lower economic demographic, can start a business or record an album or do a news story doing that. And yet we look at the changes, even minor changes, that we want to make in the law, and it's a system at odds with the way we live our lives.
Completely. So you have this ultimate fluidity, maybe too much fluidity with the devices, and then you have this system of government that's made out of cast iron, and you have every official kind of shackled and trying to move forward towards whatever the public goal is, lurching here and there, and not able to make the choice to save the fish or whatever it is.
And that makes us angry. I'm going to open it up for a question or two in just a minute. I do want to ask you one question. We had a colossal crisis in 2008 and 2009. And it was Rahm Emanuel who reportedly said, never let a good crisis go to waste. But they did. They did. Didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And, business was complicit in this because business is in the mode now. The people who represent business in Washington are not actually the people who run businesses. They're agents. And I've had painful experience with this. Business wanted every new law to be made of cast iron so there would be no surprises. They wanted to make sure everything was just so. You could have, the Volcker Rule could be one sentence.
Right.
It could be enforced prospectively, mainly. Maybe you shouldn't trade so much in London, Citibank, or whatever, so why don't you cut it back? We'll give you 3 months to unwind your positions. Not that hard to do. You don't need 500 pages of regulation. But business is actually demanding all those because they're trying to control it too. And so it's this instinct for control that actually everyone has. And so in that sense, we're all part of the problem. You have to let it go and say, okay, sure, I'll give you some rope. and I'll hang you if you screw it up. You know?
So you're talking about responsibility, accountability, and trust. And that's a problem.
Provision, not trust. I don't trust anybody. I mean, I wouldn't trust a newscaster as far as I can throw him. It's not trust. It's just provisional trust in the sense of, I'll give you a shot, but I'm watching. It's like that wonderful phrase, I don't know who used it, trust but verify. Mm-hmm. It's that idea. You don't say, do whatever you want, I trust you. You say, okay, you go try to do it well, and I'm watching. There's a difference.
Well, I've monopolized the conversation here. If there are questions, we've got time for a couple of questions, I think. And I think there are people with, anybody want to join in here?
There's somebody over here.
There we go. Thank you.
Here's a mic coming to you.
Thank you. How is what you're proposing different from what the legislators propose when they want to look at all the laws and sunset them and review them? And it sounds like it's not working, clearly. But you want something more dramatic than that?
Well, sunset laws, there's a history of sunset laws. Thomas Jefferson recommended that all laws sunset basically every 20 years. I mean, that was one of his recommendations. Sunset laws passed by states, by and large, do not work because the state legislatures have passed omnibus reauthorizations whenever they come up. Oh, it's time everything's sunset. Let's just have a one-line law that says everything is extended. So the advantage of making it a constitutional amendment is it gives the courts the power to oversee that and see if they're in good faith reconsidering the law. That's that's the idea. But no law works unless the people around it want it to work in that way. So if legislators can get away with doing stuff and the public is asleep, they'll get away with doing it. So that's one of the reasons. There have actually been a couple of states where sunset laws have worked. In Texas, for example, agencies have sunset periodically, and actually dozens of agencies have sunsetted and gotten rid of them. Mitch Daniels, I worked with Mitch Daniels, who was governor of Indiana, on a bunch of reforms. He got rid of a bunch of different agencies and commissions. Just cut them out. So with a little leadership, those laws can be actually very useful.
And you'd put it in the Constitution as well.
Yeah, you put it in the Constitution. Then all of a sudden, somebody, if Congress is doing what they're doing today, which is nothing, all of a sudden they've effectively put the courts in charge.
Right. Interesting. Yes? Right back here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. The Department of Homeland Security was created in the wake of 9/11, and I believe that what happened there was that the president was able to populate it with a lot of different programs from other agencies and really restructure it in a very different way. Is there any capacity to look at that and see if it's been effective enough to demonstrate it as a model for how government can restructure, or is perhaps the nature of the agency so secret that we can't even do that?
No, I actually once knew something about this, and now I'm trying to. They did, in fact, change some of the rules around civil service with Homeland Security, which I got involved in when they were doing it years ago. I would say this: any successful agency, any successful school, and I put the military in this, if you go do an X-ray and say, how do they make choices? You will find a department or agency where either because of culture or because of law, the people in it actually feel, when they wake up in the morning, they feel that their job is to go and do what's right, not to comply with the rules. And there have been studies of successful public schools which show that the one thing they all have in common, they're successful in very many different ways, is that the principal ignored the rules. And that they had a culture of ignoring the rules. And that empowered the teachers to focus on the students, and the teachers felt protected. And there have been a number of books about that. And there was a famous defense procurement agency, I think it was a defense base on the West Coast called China Lake, which famously was liberated from all the procurement rules and guidelines. Unbelievably more efficient in how it worked. It's just not in the nature of public servants that they can't do a good job. You can find examples both in this country and elsewhere where it does work, but the overwhelming both culture and legal structure is this central planning model that really crushes people.
And so rather than using the example of a specific agency, as a pilot case or whatever, do I hear you talking about kind of a recodification?
Yeah. We have to change the whole. So we need to transition just what Justinian or Napoleon or the Uniform Commercial Code did. You write a whole new law. You have a whole new system. You put it out of commission. You say, okay, we want a state-of-the-art worker safety regulatory oversight. And I promise you, instead of thousands of pages, it will be dozens of pages. It'll have rules for the things that are really important, that aren't self-evident. Everything else will be a principle. You'll probably, if I were advising them, I would do, Connecticut's actually done this, you would, to a certain extent, privatize enforcement. You create, like CPAs, you create certified regulatory experts, and they go in and give you an opinion. And then they work with the pig farmer to make sure there's not pig runoff, rather than just go giving him a ticket. That sort of thing. So you actually move towards more constructive regulation rather than going around slapping people on the wrist all the time, which drives everybody apart. There's so many, it's really not that hard to do. There are a lot of smart people who are talking this way, including in Europe and Australia, and in America it's called responsive regulation. Is kind of the buzz, the phrase it goes under. But it would be a completely different code.
Right.
You would just, you wouldn't prune it, you would walk away from it.
Right. It'd be interesting to see how that would get covered. Oh, one more? We'll do one more question here.
There's...
Hello? Hello? Over this side.
There you are.
There we are.
Hi.
Oh, I didn't know there were people over there. That's great.
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Philip, some very nice and reassuring words from you. You've got around the table here about 100,000 health and safety practitioners. So your suggestions about how to review health and safety legislation, I can tell you from the European perspective, it's working very well. You also offered $100. Well, I'm going to come up with Red Tape Challenge, which is what we use in the UK, and that's currently in the process of actually removing legislation that isn't required.
Oh.
The problem that we have in the profession is that quite often the legislative makers and the appliers, the judges and so on, don't necessarily engage with the profession. There's a buffer. The legal profession quite often will be a buffer between what the practitioners actually want and what the judge wants to hear. And I'd like your thoughts on how we can overcome this, how we can actually get grassroots information to do exactly what you've said. We've just posted a tweet that said 100,000 safety practitioners want to review health and safety legislation, because we're just as fed up as you are of hearing the sort of ridicule of health and safety laws, which don't make much sense.
Right. There's a Catholic church doctrine called subsidiarity. And basically the idea of subsidiarity is you push all decisions down to the lowest level. So one of the core principles which violates a part of the current orthodoxy, the core principles of a new law, is that things should not be uniform. You should let people do things in different ways, which enables the people on the ground to actually fashion their own solutions. As long as you have a belief in uniformity, it's a kind of a almost religious belief, which is what our view of the rule of law is, then you end up getting this huge superstructure. So I think the most important change to moving where you want to go and empowering the people on the ground is to abandon the idea of uniformity. You can still have boundaries. You can't do anything. You should still have oversight. But you ought to let people on the ground, the inspectors and the foremen in the factories, fashion solutions that make sense within those boundaries. And that's a completely new idea, at least in America. I'd love to talk to you more, actually. I'd love to get some, I don't know about the $100 yet, but I'm sure I can learn a lot from you.
Well, Philip, thank you for a really provocative talk and discussion. Thanks
Yeah,
very much.
Thank you,
Good
Terry.
luck to you.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.